wrong answers, really, or any silly questions. So please feel free to chime in whenever. Yeah. So this is just a little overview about what we're going to discuss and do. So again, really casual session. We're going to watch a film, really short film. There will be some reflection questions, watch another film on emissions and the politics of fracking, questions, and local relevance, in organizing around fracking. And then just some, again, concluding questions. And that's about it. Don't want to, take too much of your time. Again, it's supposed to be super chill, really informative. Please, chip in and be mindful of how much you're speaking or not speaking, because this is really just meant to be a gathering space for all of us to learn. And it's less fun if we're all silent. So, yeah, with that, we can just get into our first video, which is just a context about what fracking is.
Deep underground lies stores of once inaccessible natural gas. This gas was likely formed over millions of years as layers of decaying organisms were exposed to intense heat and pressure under the Earth's crust. There's a technology called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, that can extract this natural gas, potentially powering us for decades to come. So how does fracking work, and why is it a source of such heated controversy? A fracking site can be anywhere with natural gas, from a remote desert to several hundred feet from your backyard. It starts out with a long vertical hole, known as a well bore, drilled down through layers of sediment. When the well reaches 2,500 to 3,000 meters, it's at its kickoff point, where it can begin the process of horizontal drilling. It turns 90 degrees and extends horizontally for about 1.5 kilometers through a compressed black layer called the shale rock formation. A specialized perforating gun is then lowered and fired, creating a series of small inch-long holes that burst through the well's casing into the rock layer. About 3 to 4 months after the initial drilling, the well is ready for fracking to begin. Fracking fluid is pumped down into the well at a pressure so high it cracks the shale rock, creating fractures through which the trapped gas and oil can escape. The fluid itself is more than 90% water. The rest is made up of concentrated chemical additives. These vary depending on the specific characteristics of the fracking site, but usually fall into 3 categories. Acids for clearing debris and dissolving minerals, friction-reducing compounds to create a slippery form of water known as slip water, and disinfectant to prevent bacteria growth. Sand or clay is also mixed into the water to prop open the fissures so the gas and oil can keep leaking out even after the pressure is released. It's estimated that all of fracking's intense pumping and flushing uses an average of 3 to 6 million gallons of water per well. That's actually not a lot compared to agriculture, power plants, or even golf course maintenance, but it can have a notable impact on local water supply. And disposing of used fracking water is also an issue. Along with the trapped gas that's pumped up to the surface, millions of gallons of flowback liquid come gushing up. This liquid, containing contaminants like radioactive material, salts, heavy metals, and hydrocarbons, needs to be stored and disposed of. That's usually done in pits on site, in deep wells, or off-site at water treatment facilities. Another option is to recycle the flowback liquid, but the recycling process can actually increase levels of contamination, since the water is more toxic with each use. Wells are typically encased in steel and cement to prevent contaminants from leaking into groundwater, but any negligence or fracking-related accidents can have devastating effects. Fracturing directly into underground water hazardous underground seepage and leakage, and inadequate treatment and disposal of highly toxic wastewater can potentially contaminate drinking water around the fracking site. There's also concern about the threat of earthquakes and damaged infrastructure from pressure and wastewater injection. Links between fracking and increased seismic activity leave unresolved questions about long-term pressure imbalances that might be happening deep beneath our feet. Fracking's biggest controversy, though, is happening above the ground. The general consensus is that burning natural gas is better for the environment than burning coal, since the gas collected from fracking emits only half the carbon dioxide as coal per unit of energy. The pollution caused by the fracking itself, though, isn't negligible. Methane that leaks out during the drilling and pumping process is many times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. Some scientists argue that methane eventually dissipates, so has a relatively low long-term impact. But a greater question hangs in the air. Does fracking take time, money, and research away from the development of cleaner, renewable energy sources? Natural gas is non-renewable, and the short-run economic interests supporting fracking may fall short in the face of global climate change. Experts are still examining fracking's overarching effects. Although modern fracking has been around since the 1940s, it's boomed in the last few decades as other sources of natural gas decrease, the costs of non-renewable energies rise, and cutting-edge technologies make it so accessible. But many countries and regions have already banned fracking in response to environmental concerns. It's undeniable that fracking has reshaped the energy landscape around the world. But for what long-term benefit and at what cost?
All right. Before we get into the questions, which you did, go ahead and change this slide when you're ready. A little bit of background. So why are we even talking about fracking? Fracking is a major foundation of video here of the economy here in Tarrant County. If you did not know, Tarrant County has about 900 gas wells, and so that I actually am not 100% sure of how many fracking sites there are, but on each fracking site there can be as many as 20 gas wells, and that's across the entire county. Again, 900. And as we could tell in that particular video, fracking is associated with a ton of different environmental impacts. We'll hear about some of the health impacts in the following films. And this is something that's really widespread, and it's really an issue here. Even though it does happen everywhere, fracking does happen across the country, because so many people live so close to the fracking sites. That is something that does not happen around the country. So here it's dubbed urban drilling, again, because people might be like 300, 600 feet from a fracking site, which again just amplifies their risk of those health effects, those environmental impacts. So getting into some of these questions, I'll read both first and then just open it up to anyone who wants to respond to either one or both. So first, did anything surprise you about how fracking works? And then second, why do you think fracking might get more investment than research and installment of renewables, so renewable energy? Any thoughts?
You want to go?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm go.
Go. Go ahead.
Nah, I was just gonna say like I didn't know that it was actually like I don't know why I assumed fracking was literally like just kind of like sucking up oil. I didn't realize it was actually like breaking away like entire like chunks of earth, you know.
Yeah.
And then from there, it seeps out. It's wild.
Exactly. It actually disrupts the foundation that we stand on. Yeah. Lupe, did you
Yeah.
wanna say anything?
I didn't know it cracked the earth like that for real. I thought it was like when you guys said that it was kind of coined here that it became that angle instead. I didn't understand that, so the visual really helped. Damn, that's fundamental.
Right. So what they're talking about is conventional fracking is it looks like kind of a rocking horse kind of fixture, and it just goes up and down, and it just extracts oil or gas vertically. Fracking or hydraulic fracturing is also known as unconventional fracking. And what makes it different is that after they, drill that first initial vertical hole, they'll go horizontally just to extract more gas. So, yeah.
Why does Tarrant County have 900 sites?
Yeah, we will. So, short answer is because of the geological formation that Tarrant County sits on. It's called the Barnett Shale. So it's basically a large sediment or large width of rock that contains a lot of natural gas and oil. And there'll be a map showing the overlay between Tarrant County, other counties, and Barnett Shale.
I have a response to the second question. So, I mean, it's broader than this, but lobbying for one, lobbying and money. And then also, anytime you have a government that works on like cyclical, like short-term answers or band-aids are a big thing. And something that I think a lot of young people don't know about is that in the 90s, they did some research on renewables, and a big like roadblock they came into was like, they are kind of long-term projects, and they do take up a lot of land that requires, not a lot compared to some of what we're doing, but they take up land that requires investment, that requires its own lobby, that requires like things that like in a short-term cyclical government is hard to get accomplished when you're switching back and forth between parties all the time. So
that is such an amazing point, because in this like relatively short time span of 4 years, every politician is just worried about getting reelected. A lot of them aren't worried about longer term objectives that might be controversial in the short term, but beneficial for the public in the long term. Yeah, major frustration, I hear you. But also about the whole land issue, like not to sound like a doomsday kind of person, but if we do continue on this business as usual with fracking and other oil and gas operations, a lot of our land is going to become unlivable. So it's like, okay, again, it's the short term versus the long term. Short term, it seems like, okay, this is sustainable. We want to extract as much oil and gas as possible now, because it takes too much investment and planning to start up renewables. But long term, you'll see entire swaths of the country and the world, as we're already seeing, whether they become unlivable because of flooding due to climate change or drought or soil erosion, that all have their roots in oil and gas operations. But yeah, fabulous points. Yes.
Another reason too is just like the cycle of like investing for like just general research science is really horrific. It's like not adequately invested in for like any sciences, generally speaking. And then you look at renewables, and it's because we already have oil. It's that immediate, like we already have this, we can already use it, that people just assume like, well, I don't need to invest in renewables yet. And then they actually like try to invest in renewables. And there's so many things about the way that like the current setup of like renewables is actually not as sustainable as it could be. Like I don't think we need to have multiple genocides happening at once just to get like lithium. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. And yet here we are. So the investment is like all driven by like what's already been invested in, and it's already gaining that momentum and maintaining it because people profit off of that. So they have an ulterior motive to keep funneling that money back into it.
Exactly. And just to briefly add on to what Lila was saying, something that I've learned in the last few months is that a lot of wars are created based off of these profit-driven incentives. So, for example, Russia's attack on Ukraine, that opened up a huge opportunity for European-based oil companies to basically look elsewhere to frack or extract oil and gas, because beforehand they were getting their gas and oil from Russia. But that just gave them a perfect chance to be like, okay, we didn't really vibe with Russia in the first place. We can definitely cut y'all out now because you're doing this horrific thing to Ukrainians. But that has actually led to uptick in fracking here in Tarrant County with Total Energies French-based oil and gas company that's fracking here. We'll hear more about them in the last video, but yeah, definitely, like, you'll be so surprised to find out just how much conflict is created for people, companies, corporations, governments to make money. Yeah, unfortunately. Any other thoughts on like the video or renewables versus fracking investment? Okay. Yeah, then we can go to the next video, which is about emissions. I'll talk a little bit about politics and touch on a little of the science behind fracking. And please get snacks too, if you want. Snacks or drinks, like, they're for all of us. All right.
Passed by Congress and signed into law by President Biden provide new money and new requirements for reducing potent methane emissions, including those coming from abandoned oil and gas wells. Now the federal government has started awarding some contracts for capping those wells, but the election could impact whether this work will continue, since former President Donald Trump wants to reverse many rules and recently referred to climate concerns as a scam. Science correspondent Miles O'Brien reports from the battleground state of Pennsylvania on the larger scope of the problem.
Deep in the Allegheny National Forest of northwestern Pennsylvania,
I see something through there, yeah.
Melissa Ostroff is blazing trails down narrow roads through thick brush, hoping to see the methane for the trees.
All right, Melissa, we have to go this way. It's not through here to get around there. Oh, this just looks so much easier.
Nothing easy about this work. She's with an environmental advocacy group called Earthwork. Operating a $100,000 thermal imaging camera able to record plumes of hydrocarbons, she's hunting for methane, or natural gas, often found along with oil and often found leaking out of oil wells, active or not.
You can hear and see the bubbling that comes from the methane underground. And with this optical gas imaging camera, I'm able to also see that this methane is going into the air.
The forests of Pennsylvania are filled with thousands of orphaned and abandoned oil wells, many of them more than a century old. History's first oil rush began not far from here in 1859, when Edwin Drake drilled the first commercially viable well. Pennsylvania estimates there are more than 350,000 orphaned and abandoned wells in the state.
There's no responsible party that we can hold accountable now to clean up the mess that we have here. And so it's just leaking into the air, one of these at a time.
Methane traps about 80 times more heat during a 20-year lifetime than carbon dioxide. It is responsible for about 30% of human-caused global warming. And about 8% of methane emissions in Pennsylvania are linked to orphaned and abandoned wells.
Through this camera, it looks like smoke. I can see it kind of puffing away here. It's not totally sealed, and that's pretty typical.
The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection estimates the average cost to plug a conventional well like this is about $100,000. But this can vary depending on the depth, the condition of the well, and its accessibility. The cost creates a perverse incentive to keep wells active long past their prime.
They know the cost of plugging is really high, so they're going to try to keep it in that gray area as long as possible, where it's just producing a trickle.
The loopholes, the shades of gray, and the dearth of accurate records compound the devilish problem.
There are these documented wells that the states know about, they have records on, and then there are all these undocumented wells.
So we should also flesh them out.
Mary Kang is an associate professor of civil engineering at McGill University. She and her team were the first to publish measurements of methane emissions from abandoned oil and gas wells. They started with GPS coordinates gleaned from state databases and local activists.
There were so many times we get there and we are looking for one well and then we'll find, 5, 6, or a dozen. And then, then you start to ask, well, how many are missing?
Kang and other experts estimate there may be 1 million orphaned oil and gas wells in the U.S. But right now, only 140,000 of them are documented. The bipartisan infrastructure bill set aside $4.7 billion to begin tackling the problem. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has used the money to greatly accelerate a well capping campaign, celebrating its 200th finished project in March. Governor Josh Shapiro.
Today, Pennsylvania is facing the consequences of a legacy left by an industry that made a buck off our natural resources and then got away with it abandoning these gas wells without properly plugging them.
The American Petroleum Institute, which represents oil and gas producers, says it has established strong industry standards to advance the permanent closure and remediation of historic wells. And it supports a sound policy framework for bonding and financial assurance to ensure operators can meet their decommissioning obligations.
Typically, I go straight to the Department of Environmental Protection and file a complaint.
Methane is odorless, and yet the forest is pungent with the foul smell of rotten eggs. It is hydrogen sulfide, a toxic chemical that often accompanies methane. Other hitchhikers include volatile organic compounds, among them benzene, a carcinogen.
There are health hazards to breathing this in. And you'll see tanks like this in people's backyards. And it's just really venting out.
Nearby, in Bradford, Pennsylvania, wherever you go or drive through, you'll see reminders that this is a city and a region built by, of, and amid oil wells. Many are still in operation. At the end of 2023, the Environmental Protection Agency finalized rules designed to detect and control methane emissions from active oil and gas production facilities. But requirements are relaxed for the small wells so common here.
Yep, they're all over the place there. Right next to homes, right next to schools.
The tank beside this shed is nestled in a neighborhood. The smell offered us a telltale of trouble.
You sure I smell you here?
The camera confirmed it was an open hatch designed to vent methane emissions.
Otherwise, it would explode. And it's unfortunately become just a part of the scenery here.
While our cameras were out, we provoked some curiosity and concern. Maddie Chaucer is a mother of 4 who moved here in 2020. Melissa showed her the smoking hatch footage.
It's opened up a crack, and that's just allowing it to go out like that.
Is there a way to fix this?
So
It's not leaking like that?
She said summer nights are often the worst.
The smell was so bad that it would wake me out of my sleep. And it would give me stomach aches, headaches, just an overall feeling of sickness. I don't want to slam anybody's livelihood, but I also don't want my health and my children's health to be in jeopardy. Watching that video of the chemicals pouring out of those, it kind of like puts evidence to what I've been feeling for the last 3 years.
The evidence is everywhere if you have the ability to look. It's hard to imagine getting to net zero carbon emissions without stopping the steady stream of leaking methane. Millions of old holes must be plugged, even as tens of thousands of new ones are drilled every year. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Miles O'Brien in Bradford, Pennsylvania.
Cool. So, a lot of good information there that showed more of the
2 major laws passed.
political and bureaucratic sides of this whole fracking situation. And so, yeah, I will wait. Thank you. Let's talk about it. the questions. Again, I will say them out loud, and feel free to react, respond to any one of them. So the first one is, what did you learn about the environmental risk of fracking? And second, what can politicians do to protect their residents from the harms of fracking? Why might they not take these steps?
I think when it comes to the first question, I think a lot of the times previously when I would think about it, I think about like, you know, new sites that are like being proposed to be built, or, you know, ones that are currently operating, but I'd never really thought about old ones that have just been kind of left there and that people are living amongst people. And now I'm thinking about like all the times I've driven around in the city and I'm like, what's that smell? Like now it's like, it's all coming together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So they talked about hydrogen sulfide, which smells like rotten eggs. I would guess that probably everybody in this room has smelled that at one point or the other. You may have thought it was maybe sewage or something, but yeah, likely hydrogen sulfide. And the scarier thing to me, at least, is a lot of the pollutants associated with fracking or other oil and gas infrastructure like compressor stations, which are basically just places where they add more sort of momentum to the oil to keep it flowing to the ports out of Houston. They're emitting 24/7, and a lot of it is invisible and odorless. That doesn't mean it's, you know, safe. It's just you can't see it, you can't smell it, but it's there. And again, I'm kind of going to the second question, but many of our elected officials, particularly here in the state of Texas, are not monitoring these emissions. You know, they're not taking people's concerns seriously when they report these odors or these health effects like migraines for weeks on end and their children, or asthma or what have you. So yeah, thank you for that reflection. Yes.
And just to kind of add on to that, like the Texas Commission for Environmental Quality, like recently has been found to actually not be as effective as they were supposed to be at like actually monitoring what was going on. And so they like used to have enough funding to like vaguely go and like check stuff out when anything happened. And now they don't have enough like staffing or vans to be able to actually like get out to sites and do testing they need to. So it's now like that's another part of the issue. Like we can't effectively regulate anything because the actual funding for the environmental regulation is so low or non-existent that it's just like how do you do it?
Yeah.
I also don't imagine that a lot of our local politicians are like concerned about it too much, just because I don't imagine they live in areas where they're highly impacted. Like if I'm a politician who has my fingers in a bunch of pots and has people vying for my attention, I'm not gonna go choose to live by a gas well.
Mm-hmm.
So like to feel the effects or to have that really impact me long term, to make that change or adjustment isn't high on the radar, because I don't imagine it affects them personally.
Right. Agreed. Or they have access to phenomenal health insurance. So if anything does come up, they can get the treatment they need. Because it's really hard to escape fracking in Tarrant County, and particularly parts of Tarrant County, like Arlington, where I live, even Fort Worth. If you live in East Fort Worth, like around this area, can't escape it. And of course, also, air does not obey boundaries. It does, well, not does water. So you polluting here, down the street in South 6, it's gonna travel all across the county. So, and the country and the world, mixing with other pollutants. So it's like, it's a really limited view. Some of these politicians, I imagine, kind of the framing they make in their heads, like, oh, this doesn't affect me, so I'm not gonna like pay any mind to it. Well, actually it does. The sad reality is that unfortunately the people who have the least to do with all this are the most impacted or the first impacted, and have to deal with the consequences before anybody else sort of becomes aware and stops dragging their feet and does something about it. But yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
I think my question would be is how much money do they accept from oil and gas, these politicians?
Mm-hmm.
Like I know Fort Worth City Council is like heavily in bed with Lockheed Martin. And so like that would be my question is like how much money do not only like city council but also like countywide officials and then like congressional officials
Speak
and
up.
like where that's actually going to like how much they actually take from that.
Yeah, so I can just like reflect the response. Thank you, Lydia. That was really insightful. So Lydia was saying like, how much money do these politicians, these governments take from oil and gas companies is a good question to consider. I imagine that a lot of that information is under wraps because these politicians don't want, their finances to be checked and tracked and the relationships to be exposed. But yeah, definitely a great question. And even like what of our beloved public institutions might actually be funded by oil and gas money, like different parks or community centers that some of these companies or politicians are working together might use to greenwash, where the source of the money is coming from. But yes.
Did she say something about Lockheed Martin? You said, could she reiterate?
Oh yeah, I said that our city council is heavily in bed with Lockheed. They accept money. Heavily in bed with Lockheed Martin. They accept money, and then also some of the city council members used to work for Lockheed Martin.
The reason I'm curious, like I am, got a daughter who works for Lockheed out of her house. She worked for 14 years in a cubicle, and they promoted her and gave her a lot of bells and whistles and buttons, and now she's making better money and working, as I said, out of her house. And she is she's in there. She's in on this. She's in, look at whatever favors that they have or curiosities they have about money, they ask her. And then she is a whiz. She is their girl for finding information quickly. She just has a knack for it. And she knows where to look online, and she knows the buzzwords that the computer languages understand. But she went to courses. She learned all this stuff through training. And she is the enemy. Like she's my daughter. I love her, but she's also an insider.
Yeah, and the focus of the movement for environmental justice, for a just transition, is not to, like, our focus is not to villainize people. It's not even to really put people out of a job. It's really to re-emphasize a love for our planet, for other people, for other species, and that we should all have, access to these basic needs and to live in a healthy environment, a thriving environment. And it's not necessarily about like individual employees, at a particular company, whether it's Lockheed Martin or ExxonMobil or what have you. Ultimately, they will be out of a job, I'd like to think, in the world I'd like to see, because we have made a transition to relying mostly on renewable energies and other forms of energy, less extractive systems. But we're not focusing on like trying to hate on people per se. We're focused about love and growth and moving forward.
And
yes.
I think maybe we can also say that we're like trying to just have the actual, because I mean, like, your daughter is not, like, she might be working for the enemy, but your daughter is not the enemy.
Right.
Your daughter is just making a living.
Yeah.
And I would hope to see the corporations, like for example Lockheed Martin, actually take responsibility and take the proper precautions. Like if they're gonna be fracking and they're gonna be like extracting oil, then there should be at least properly making sure that everything is in order so that there's the absolute least, if possible, no contaminants. But you know what I'm saying? Where it's like something where it's like, and then obviously when it comes down to like the future where we do see and we hope to see renewable energy, I would hope that they might be out of a job with Lockheed Martin for fracking, but there might be an option to go somewhere else to work. Maybe, I don't know, something else, you know. Anything that's more renewable.
Yeah, I'm
Exactly.
gonna steer the conversation back.
Yeah.
I use Lockheed as an example. They're a war profiteer company that makes weapons. But our main conversation is around Total Energies here in Sharon.
Yeah.
So I want to steer it back away from Lockheed to.
Yes. What? Real quick, friend in the back. Did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, Don Yocrata here, co-owner of the bookstore, and interesting that we're having this conversation. We, did the Trinity River Book Festival. One of our sponsors for the book festival is Lawrence Steffi. Lawrence Steffi, dealing with politics, he worked with, he did the book on George Mitchell. George Mitchell, if you know, is considered the father of fracking and sustainability at the same time. And the paradox in all of this is he's the one that designed the Woodlands, which is supposed to be one of the most environmentally sound communities in Texas. So connecting the dots, he did this biography on George Mitchell and then turned around and wrote this book called The Big Empty. And so it talks about how big tech companies have come into this town. It was a town in West Texas. Sometimes you learn the most about what's going on in fiction and the impact it does to community, and how what was supposed to be something, to help the community grow, it became devastating for that particular community. And so it's just in connecting the dots and seeing the real relevance. I invite people to just, take this a step further, because this book is a great conversation. If you wanted to do a group read, or even George Mitchell's book called Fracking and Sustainability at the same time. So it was a paradox, which his son today calls it a paradox, because they're looking at all the profits that are involved in this. But at the same time, how do we protect the community? So it's this paradox. And so it deserves a greater conversation, and I think it's a lot of takeaway. And how do you involve politics and deal with the government at the same time? And the small community West Texas did that.
Right. Thank you for introducing that nuance. And Big Empty, I have to check out that book for sure. And our next debate. In our next short film and our last one, we'll touch on the local impact and how different people have been trying to work with the government to protect their communities from big oil. But yeah, that's a really good point. Thinking about, to me, what I really took away from that is again, greenwashing. So how some of these companies or politicians will throw around buzzwords like sustainability and green energy, and not even natural gas, like the use of the term natural in that phrase, makes it seem like, oh, okay, this is good. This is inevitable. This is a green fuel, when it's really not the case. And liquefied natural gas, they were saying in the first video, was initially thought to be a cleaner fuel than coal. Well, actually, there are studies showing that it can be a worse fuel than coal because of where the fracking sites, again, where that oil and gas is extracted. All the machinery that's required to extract it is polluting. Yes, and then we'll move on.
Which I'll try to be. When they drill in their shallows, and anything that's deeper than 800 feet is considered above 800 feet as a shallow drill. That's relatively shallow drill. They go down 1,500 to 2,800 to maybe 300,000 feet down. And looking for pockets side drilling, they did that in somewhere in the swamplands of the South. I don't know which state it was, but I'm thinking Louisiana, and where the side drilling, they went into a liquid, they called it a sludge pot, and they were side drilling going out in all directions, and then go down another 500 feet and then side drill, and they were hitting sludge pot holes left and right, and they were empty. They pumped it all out, and they made their money off of that. And are you on the same page? As the swamp drained down, and it was like a sinkhole in the middle of the water of the floor of that swamp, and dried it out. Trees were disappearing and going down. You're watching these trees in the water and whirlpools going round and round everywhere. About 4 or 5 whirlpools out there in the flat of this water area, and these whirlpools and trees just disappearing before your eyes. Movement.
They call it, the book is called, I'm sorry, I read a lot.
This is all related. This is all related to what you're talking about.
It's called The Diminishing Shorelines of Louisiana, and that is a real thing.
It was Louisiana.
Yeah, it's called Diminishing Shoreline. What you're talking about talks about that very concept of what was happening.
The impact that it has not only on wildlife and the environment for nature, it affects us dramatically because of the water supply is disappearing. Because of this, the empty pockets of nothing there has to fill with something. It's going to take it. And our lakes are going to drain off into it. Our water sources and all the resources, our rivers and estuaries and the aquifers that are underground rivers, that they're going to go dry.
Yeah.
And fill with water and be contaminated.
Yes, that's the major issue. Is our water? Water is not clean water is not an infinite or limitless resource. So you heard they use in Texas, the average well uses 7 to 8 million gallons of water per well that can no longer enter or be part of the water cycle. So once it's fracked, once they inject it underground, it's too contaminated to be used again for drinking, eating, bathing, what have you. That's one way that they take our water. 2, they might contaminate it. Well, it's not intentional, I don't think, but these the cement that lines these wells is not infallible. So over time it erodes, it cracks, that those chemicals leach into the water table. Boom, our water's gone there. And yeah, what you were saying with some of this infrastructure, the ecosystems are really unstable, or the sediment's unstable, and water then seeps underground there. We're gonna have to move on. I did see a couple hands, so we'll get Izzy.
Oh, I'll be quick. Coming back to the politics one, I think one thing we need to talk about more is appropriation of funds. I read a book recently called Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond that talks about, in this specific example, they use welfare and the misappropriation of welfare funds, particularly in certain like southern communities. But if you think that's not happening with your environmental protection agencies, you're crazy. We appropriate a certain amount of funds like annually or biannually to these agencies who are supposed to protect us and keep things safe on state local and federal levels, and the likelihood that all of that money is going to those places or being used for the right things by those places is very, very, very slim, especially in red states. And I just, like, there's not a lot of accountability for the elected officials who are responsible for making sure that those funds that are appropriated for those things get used correctly. And I think that is important because while they already don't have enough appropriated to them to like fully staff and research and whatnot, if they're not getting all of that appropriated money, then that's even less work that they can do.
Yeah. Definitely. I think we are grappling with like an erosion. I know I'm personally grappling with institutional distrust or distrust of like our supposedly foundational institutions in this country. So government entities like the EPA or the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, which is one of 2 entities here in Texas that is supposed to be looking out for our environmental quality, but isn't. So accountability about where the money goes is a major issue. So I'm sorry, we're gonna take the chorus question, then we're gonna move on. But we can talk at the end, is that okay? Or like after the second?
I'll lose my train of thought. I've got it on my mind now.
Can you make a note of
I'll
it?
be quick.
Okay, let's.
I'm just kind of curious to wonder, like, have there not been any like studies or research done? Because like what you said about like water, you're right. Like water is not this renewable resource. Once you like, shit where you ate, it's done. You know what I mean? So like, I mean, y'all are revolutionizing, fracking. We can't revolutionize with a different substance. Like we're just throwing some pebbles in the cracks. I mean, can we not use water? Like I know this isn't a question for you specifically, but I'm just kind of curious as to like, why are we using one of the only finite resources we have on this planet?
The most essential one.
Yeah. To like be able to like do this stuff. Like there's seawater. I don't know. You just need a liquid. Like I don't know. Anyway, continue.
That's a great point that I've also thought about, and I do not know the answer to. I assume it's the chemicals, the reaction they need to do.
They have like a trade secret deal on it, so they don't have to disclose the information on the chemical composition because it's a trade secret, which then they're able to just not have to worry about like any limits on anything to disclose.
We can talk more about this after our last short film.
People who live 300 feet away from wells are being poisoned.
Just about everybody in this community right here died from some form of cancer.
My hair turned brown and my water turned black. It's like putting gasoline on a fire. That's what it's doing to our climate.
Total is polluting not just our air and water, but also our institutions of governance.
L'État français nage en pleine hypocrisie avec le gaz de schiste puisqu'il a interdit sa production sur son territoire. Lui, on l'importe des États-Unis.
There, look right. The crane is a total drill site. You're looking at Arlington, you can see it's residential, but now it's a mining town. There's another total drill site right past it. See how close they are? Just look at this. This is right on top of their homes.
Yeah, it started about a year ago. All the noise and everything, and the lights. But it would go in through the windows at night, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning.
The sound was unbearable, like a freight train coming 3 feet from your front door. When we would come out, we'd have to go back in because the smell was so horrible.
Just smells like metals, kind of, I guess.
Just toxic stink, where it would kind of hurt for you to breathe.
If we're outside for a long time, we get headaches.
And the foundations of our homes. You see where I put concrete in? The walls in my house, in my kitchen, they vibrate. I have plates on my walls, so they rattle.
My concern is also long-term effects that I don't feel now. If in 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, I have some sort of cancer or lung disease or something like that, who's liable at that point?
It's black foam. I don't want to move.
But I don't like that either. This is a Total Energies drill site in Arlington. This is one of the few places in the world where fracking for gas happens so close to homes and schools and daycares. I think it's a crime. We have no protection here.
Alors attendez, c'est quoi la fracturation hydraulique? C'est le procédé utilisé pour extraire du gaz de schiste, qui servira ensuite à produire de l'électricité ou du chauffage par exemple. On parle d'un forage de 2 à 3 km sous terre, puis de 1,5 km de long. On y envoie des dizaines de millions de litres d'eau, du sable et des produits chimiques, sous forte pression pour fracturer la roche, le schiste, et permettre au gaz de remonter. L'eau utilisée ne peut plus être réintégrée au réseau de l'eau, trop polluée. Donc on la stocke sous terre, dans des cuves, ou on la réutilise pour perforer d'autres puits. En France, c'est interdit depuis 2011. Il y a des risques de pollution, des nappes phréatiques notamment, et de tremblements de terre.
Yeah, just a week ago. We wanted to get away from the fracking going on in Arlington. You know, Arlington is just completely covered in wells, like they're everywhere. We lived less than a quarter mile from the actual well, from the fracking site, and we were reminded by it every day. You know, that was the biggest thing. Like all it took was just opening the door and smelling it.
We did load up in the car and go to the park a couple times, but no, I did not go outside there. And I was like running with the car seat and like, let's get in the car. Yeah. I felt like we were being dramatic, but then at the same time, I was like, no, I want to make sure that we're cautious. If we're not cautious and the kids do get sick, then I'll never be able to forgive myself, you know?
It just felt like, you know, the government, at least Arlington, just didn't care. Yeah. I think it's just a lot of frustration, a lot of anger. Fracking is illegal in France. So it's like, okay, well, there's a kind of a double standard here, right? Like, how come it's allowed here and they're exporting it over there? So it's just kind of like, it makes you laugh a little bit. Like, where's the sense in that, right? It doesn't make any sense.
I think there are over 5 million Texans who live within a mile of oil and gas. In Arlington, they're living in the middle of a chemistry experiment. What they're going for is methane. But along with that comes benzene. It's a class 1 carcinogen. It interferes with the DNA. Their health is certainly impaired, and they may or may not get a major disease from this. Chances of asthma attacks are way up for adults and children. Heart failure, congestive heart failure, leukemia, a particular type of leukemia in children is higher. Birth defects, congenital defects of the heart are higher for children. We have shown an increase in death rate. It's not just how far you are from a well. It's how far you are from how many wells. As far as I know, Arlington and the Barnett Shale are the worst. How far a setback should be? Well, 2,000 feet is in the most successful, because of course oil and gas companies argue against this. But I would like to see at least a 1 kilometer setback. What to do if you live 350 feet away? I recommend moving. If you can't move, what can you do? You could stay indoors. If you want to send your children out to play in the fresh air, don't, because the air out there is dirtier than it is inside. Run your HEPA filter. That may help some, but the ultimate solution is to get out.
Ça, c'est la ville d'Arlington. Sur les 367 puits qui sont présents dans la ville, 181 sont exploités par Total, donc plusieurs dizaines à moins de 800 mètres d'écoles ou de crèches.
Par exemple ici, on voit bien les émissions d'un puits qui est à moins de 750 mètres d'une école.
Question distance, tout le monde n'est pas d'accord. Pour l'État du Texas, la distance minimale est de moins de 200 mètres des habitations. Pour le reste du pays, le Colorado a établi une limite à 600 mètres. Los Angeles l'a interdit en milieu urbain et le Vermont et New York l'ont interdit sur tout leur territoire. Mais alors, comment ça se fait que Total soit aussi présent dans cette ville et si proche des habitations? Ça serait même l'entreprise qui fore au plus proche des foyers urbains ces dernières années. Selon une enquête de Disclose, l'obtention de nouveaux permis est garantie par la manne financière qu'elle génère pour la ville, mais aussi défendue par Brian Shaw. C'est lui. Là, il est au conseil municipal, embauché par Total pour défendre ses intérêts, mais c'est aussi l'ancien patron de la commission environnementale du Texas. Disclose questionne donc la porosité qu'il pourrait y avoir entre Total et l'agence environnementale. Face à tout ça, Ranjana et son organisation ont mis en échec Total sur 2 sites. L'un proche du lac, de peur qu'il pollue leur source d'eau potable, et l'autre jugé trop proche d'une garderie. Des années de lutte pour ces 2 victoires.
Behind me is Texas Life. It's a hotel, and the city of Arlington gave private developer $50 million from the gas royalty fund as a gift to develop the hotel. The city government is responsible for issuing permits. They have the power to say yes or no. They are very supportive of industry. They give them whatever they want. So in those ways, I think Total is polluting not just our air and water, but also our institutions of governance.
So what's happening here is that the tanks have a hatch on the top, and the hatch opens, then it's leaking and letting gases escape. The tanks are not meant to hold gas, they're meant to hold liquids. When the liquids get in the tanks, the gas separates, it rises to the top of the tank and volatilizes. If that gas is not released, the tanks will explode. That's methane and volatile organic compounds. And methane is a climate accelerant, over 80 times more powerful than CO2 on a 20-year time frame. It's like putting gasoline on a fire. That's what it's doing to our climate. They contribute to ozone. This is the road we're traveling on, and each one of these spots, these white spots out here, is where a well was fracked, and there's a well there. Each one of those. I moved because fracking surrounded me. My air turned brown and my water turned black. We moved to Denton, and we ran right into the fracking boom in Denton, Texas, and that's when I got involved in trying to get a fracking ban there.
This is where there was a protest. Denton is the only city in Texas to ban fracking with 60% of the vote, but then the state passed a law that made it illegal to ban fracking anywhere in Texas. The state of Texas is owned by the oil and gas industry, so they just shower lawmakers with money and they get the laws passed that they want.
Ça, c'est le Texas. Tous les points que vous voyez, c'est des puits de gaz. Il est acheminé par pipeline jusqu'à 2 terminaux sur la côte. Il y est liquéfié par refroidissement pour qu'il prenne moins de place. Ensuite, il peut être envoyé par bateau à travers l'Atlantique. Les États-Unis sont les plus gros exportateurs mondiaux de gaz naturel liquéfié, dont la majorité est issue du fracking. Les exportations ont beaucoup augmenté vers l'Europe depuis la guerre en Ukraine et la réduction des exportations russes. Il y a eu 3 fois plus de GNL exportés en 2023 qu'en 2021. Les US ont beaucoup misé sur le gaz de schiste en tant qu'énergie de transition. Sauf que des études scientifiques relèvent que les émissions de gaz à effet de serre dues à l'exploitation du gaz de schiste seraient autant, voire plus importantes que celles produites par l'extraction du charbon. Décembre 2023, Joe Biden décide de mettre en pause toutes les nouvelles plateformes d'export de GNL, pour des raisons économiques, pour la sécurité énergétique et aussi pour l'impact sur le changement climatique. Nous, on est allé voir le terminal de Freeport LNG. Il est dans la région du Texas qui a le plus haut taux de décès par cancer à cause des industries pétrochimiques. Et quant au terminal de liquéfaction, il dégage par an l'équivalent en gaz à effet de serre de plus de 23 millions de voitures.
Freeport is in a bad condition. It is a ghost town. Look at it. used to go into a shop, used to see what's in the windows. Now you can't see anything but a dead town, and it's the heart of the town. We're being taken advantage of. No growth, no opportunities, no future. When my mom came here, she was healthy as a horse. But after the period of time living in this environment, my mom died from cancer. My auntie died from cancer. My grandmother died from cancer. My uncle died from cancer. Okay? Just about everybody in this community right here died from some form of cancer. What? We got to stay on the global economy projection for America so they can be the greatest superpower on the planet. You'll get a better view of the LNG facility on this side. How y'all doing? Pretty good. This part of LNG is the processing. Then you have the tanks that hold the liquefied natural gas. The processed natural gas runs and loads the ships through those pipes right there. That place, further up in the pipeline, LNG exploded. LNG and that contract promised that there were 287 jobs, if I'm correct. Well, LNG only had 130 people working, and the report from FERC was that it was workers' fatigue that caused the explosion. They're not honoring the agreement in the tax abatement, and no one is holding them accountable. It's just business as usual. The corporations in the industry will make money, but the citizens in the community won't make not $1 because all of that goes to the owners and is sold overseas.
On est ici aujourd'hui en mer avec Greenpeace pour dénoncer l'arrivée du terminal gazier flottant Cap Anne. De gaz en provenance des États-Unis qui arrivera dans ce terminal est du gaz de schiste, alors que le gouvernement français a interdit la production de gaz de schiste depuis une dizaine d'années. Donc on est vraiment dans une situation extrêmement hypocrite et cynique. Ce gros bateau, c'est le terminal méthanier affrété par Total, qui s'entrera en septembre, et qui va permettre d'accueillir du gaz et de l'injecter dans le réseau de distribution. Au moment de la guerre en Ukraine, les lobbies du gaz ont compris qu'ils avaient une opportunité assez inouïe. Ils ont vraiment joué cet argument du risque, du danger de pénurie de gaz en Europe pour faire signer des contrats d'installation de terminaux gaziers, et ça a fonctionné. On avait tout à fait les moyens sans ce terminal supplémentaire d'importer du gaz. Et d'ailleurs, les capacités d'utilisation des terminaux avant l'installation du CAPAB n'étaient pas à leur maximum. On n'était pas du tout à 100% d'utilisation des terminaux et on n'y est toujours pas évidemment, quoi. Et en fait, Total a réussi à se créer sa porte d'entrée perso pour son gaz en France. Total jouit exclusivement de 50% de la capacité du terminal sur 5 ans pour ses bénéfices personnels. Le business des énergies fossiles, c'est un des business les plus rentables de la planète. C'est une cargaison. On peut voir son prix multiplié par 5 entre les États-Unis et la France. Elle part à peu près 50-55 millions de dollars. Elle est revendue à 250-255 millions de dollars. Ça remplit les poches des actionnaires. Donc, c'est pas en demandant gentiment à Total de réduire sa production que ça va marcher. C'est absolument nécessaire que les États, à tous les niveaux, au niveau national, européen, international, exigent une diminution de la production d'énergie fossile avec différents moyens, que ce soit via des taxations, via des sanctions sur les dividendes. Mais tant que la machine étatique ne réfléchit pas à la manière de fermer le robinet, on peut toujours espérer atteindre nos objectifs climatiques.
pause here because it's a bunch of like promises to the clients and consumers that we're actually a good company that have been contested.
People who live 300 feet away.
Okay, so we only have a few more minutes in this wonderful venue until we have to move on. So I'm just gonna sort of wrap things up. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So second video, we learned about fracking in Pennsylvania. This last video, we learned about fracking more locally in Arlington and in Freeport, so across the state. Though, like I mentioned earlier, fracking isn't, exclusive to just Arlington, but also Fort Worth and definitely north of Tarrant. So this is a map showing gas wells in Tarrant versus Dallas County, excuse me. And yeah, all the little dots you see are fracking sites actually. You can see they're way more populous in Tarrant, which is this box here, than Dallas. And then we go to the next slide. And that's probably because of geologically, how the counties were delineated, but also politically. So I know it might be a little hard to see, but Tarrant County is within the Barnett Shale, which we've heard like in the last video, I mentioned it earlier, which is outlined in black. And only about like maybe a third of Dallas County is within that shale. But we do know also that Tarrant County officials tend to be more friendly to oil and gas. So again, that's what makes it a geologic and political issue. I do want to point out something from the video sorry, I should have given a heads up that it was going to be in French, but there were subtitles. Sorry if you missed some of the information that was on the subtitles, but I do want to point out that Brian Shaw, they said, used to work for used to be the director of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Again, one of those two entities that's supposed to protect our health, our environment. He now works for Total Energies, which is one of the main culprits of all the drilling here in Tarrant County. And there have also been articles that have come out showing the relationship between people who worked at the TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and who now work for Total Energies, including their director. And then something else I want to point out about that video. So Tarrant County, they mentioned Los Angeles very briefly. And that's important because Tarrant County is only the county with the second highest number of people living less than half a mile from fracking, so experiencing urban drilling. Los Angeles County is the first, so they have the most number of people living so close to fracking in the entire country. But as I mentioned in the last video, in LA, they actually passed a law that said they are decommissioning the wells and they're getting that industry out of there, so close to homes. And this was passed within the last few months. And here in Tarrant County, we hear nothing from our politicians. So it's likely that soon we will be the county with the highest number of people in the nation living, again, only a few hundred feet from fracking, when experts say that we should be 2,000, 3,000 feet from fracking instead of just 300 or 600 feet like it is currently the case. And then we can go to the last slide, please. Let me check the time. Okay. So just want to open it up for some reflections, and particularly if you have not shared yet and want to just contribute some thoughts about what we learned today, discussed today. Anybody? Sure.
I just recently divorced and have moved in the rent house that I had. I moved out of there, turned it into a rent house, married her, and then now I'm divorced, now I'm back. But in the 15 years that I was married over in Haltom City, which is a stone's throw that way, I saw so much laws being broken. They put a pipe. They didn't frack. They side drilled a pressure loaded pipe under an elementary school. And it was made out of cast iron. And 2 times it fractured and sent children to the hospital. And the news media was paid off. The city council was paid off to keep their mouths shut.
Yeah.
And there are people that money does talk. And it closes the mouths of a lot of injustice. I mean, the people who need to speak out are sitting on their hands and not doing anything. And this is a grassroots where we are right now. If we don't go anywhere and attend City Hall and get a caravan down to Austin, we in this room tonight, if there's 2 people that'll do it, that'll get in their car and on the next event that is related to this subject content does not go down to Austin, should be ashamed of ourselves. Every one of us in this room should be ashamed.
Yeah. Thank you, friend. What's your name?
Mark Williams.
Okay, Mark. Thank you for saying that. I think we'll use that to conclude the night. So on the screen, there are a couple of organizations that work on environmental justice. Yeah, and also it's the group that's hosting this tonight. Big Oil Out of Texas campaign that's part of Sunrise Terror, a youth-led environmental justice organization. We are trying to do just that. We're trying to educate folks and mobilize people ultimately towards, holding our politicians accountable and increasing people's awareness about what these oil and gas companies, namely Total Energies, French-based, how they're working in cahoots to ultimately pollute our communities and export the profit. With that, I think we have some materials in the back that you can pick up if you're interested in staying in touch with us. I will be around outside because we do need to leave this space, and a few others from our team will be outside if you want to chat. Is there anything else?
We're going to set up a sign-in sheet.
Sign-in sheet? Okay, yeah. So just stop by that table right there on your way out. Yeah, you got your core holding up the clipboard. Please write your name, email, I believe, and let's keep in touch. But thank you so much for coming out tonight, and hope you get back safe. Oh, please take snacks too. Yeah. Please. We don't need any of that. Yeah.
And it